everyone. My name is Nikki Morales, and on behalf of the ACLA team, we want to welcome you all to today's Lunch and Learn. Today's topic is focused on addressing burnout and moral injury in difficult times and spaces. And we'll be learning more about this topic from our three presenters who will introduce themselves shortly. Just a couple reminders for today's session. The session is being recorded and will be available afterwards on our website. Please remain muted throughout the presentations, and Q&A will be held at the very end, so please feel free to use the chat in the meantime. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it off to Dr. Kelly McSwan with the LA Health Services Workforce Wellbeing Team, who will kick off our panelists and presentation introductions. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We'll do the next slide. Here we are. Hopefully you recognize me. That is my forever picture. We joke about that was taken a little while ago, but probably my only professional one. And hopefully I look similar to my picture that I took several years ago. But there's me. We have bios here. We're not going to bore you with them. They are available for reading at a later time. I am a clinical psychologist. I'm part of the very small but mighty team here for workforce well-being, along with my partners in crime, Dr. Tristan Webster, and our chief, Charmaine Dorsey, that we will be hearing from very soon.
Hi, so I'm Dr. Tristan Webster. So I am the newest comer to our new team, but have been here for a minute now. And I'm very much enjoying being a part of spreading workplace wellness to our department. Very much needed, and definitely seeing some wonderful results. So glad to be here and glad to be with y'all.
Hello, everybody. It is such an honor and pleasure to be sharing space with each of you today. So many of you I've been able to work alongside of in a variety of different ways. So wonderful that you've made time to be here today and to hear from our incredible well-being psychologists. You're in for a treat. I'm here to be able to be a support and to just introduce our well-being efforts across health services and to say each of you is a priority. We want to prioritize caring for each of you that care so well for others. And so with our framework, as we think about, and you'll hear a little bit more about, we really do think that this is part of a broader definition of what well-being is in terms of really talking through some of these and how do we help support. So I hope that today is something that is fruitful for you all, and please know that we are a team that is available to each of you. And so I want to get us into the amazing content for today.
So our title here, addressing burnout and moral injury in difficult times and spaces. So here's us, our small but mighty team. Roberta is not with us today. She is out, but she is part of our support staff and definitely part of our team. You see us all here, yay, at one of our events that we were at a park. And we just introduced ourselves, but here's us in a little slightly less formal setting and supporting our staff like we love to do. Okay, so we're going to be starting with burnout. So how we address burnout, how we define burnout, how we recognize burnout has really changed over the years. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So in the beginning, the concept of burnout was first formally defined in the 1970s by someone named Herbert Freudenberger. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. He's an American psychologist, and that was in the 70s. And his definition, he used the term burnout to describe the state of physical and mental exhaustion. And he observed this in healthcare workers and others in helping professions. He defined it as a state of mental and physical exhaustion caused by one's professional life. So you notice in the beginning here, the focus was very much on helping professions and work, without really any definition of recognition of burnout in other areas in our life. But it was a good starting point. So his early work focused on the emotional toll of working in high stress, emotionally demanding environments like we have when we're healthcare workers. So just like I said, that the definition and how we think about it has changed over time. And again, the helping professions was the first one. And he defined that as even volunteers, social workers, nurses, doctors, everyone in the helping profession, and focused on work. So then we move into the 1980s for burnout. In the 1980s, Christina Maslach, a social psychologist, developed the Maslach Burnout Inventory, and we're going to be seeing this again. It became the gold standard and still is for measuring burnout. And she conceptualized burnout in a three-dimensional syndrome. She said emotional exhaustion, very much like the same initial evaluation or definition, depersonalization, really characterized by cynicism and detachment from our work, and reduced personal accomplishment. Those were her three areas. And this model shifted the focus from just emotional fatigue to include attitudes towards work and our self-worth. So more all-encompassing of the person as a whole. So in the 1990s, it started being recognized across industries, not just healthcare workers or volunteers or people in the healthcare profession. Burnout was really recognized in this point in corporate, tech, legal, and other creative industries. And research highlighted how organizational culture, for the first time, organizational culture, management style, and work-life imbalance contribute to burnout. Again, we're moving towards the focus of the whole person, but really focusing not just on the person, but the organization as a whole and the organizational culture and how that contributes or even causes burnout. So the idea that burnout is not just about overwork, but also about lack of control, purpose, and support. And these are things that started to gain ground in the 1990s. So moving into the 2000s, we start hearing the word well-being. Burnout became linked to broader mental health issues. So not only are they saying that burnout was an issue, we have this definition of burnout, but really recognizing that burnout is tied to, associated with, or even causing further mental health challenges like depression, anxiety, and even substance abuse as a coping mechanism. It was increasingly seen as a systemic issue, just like we talked about, not just an individual's inability to cope. And then employers and HR professionals began integrating stress management, employee assistant programs, we're seeing these rolling out, and wellness initiatives into the workplace. Instead of just saying, go home and deal with it, go relax, take a day or two off, they're really starting to incorporate these workforce well-being and ways to address burnout into the actual workplace. So 2010s, we're making more progress quickly, but this is the digital age and burnout culture. So we all know that technology is increasing very quickly and really increasing faster than our brains are able to cope. There's a lot of digital burnout that I'm sure you've heard, talking about the hustle culture, remote work, 24/7 connectivity, increased awareness of burnout. It used to be you would leave the office, you'd leave the hospital, maybe you'd have a pager, but that would be it. But now we're texting, we're on our phone, we're available to log in. And so there's this availability or need to be available 24/7. We heard terms like Zoom fatigue, compassion fatigue, techno stress was a new term. And millennials and Gen Z workers especially vocalized burnout from issues like lack of meaning, poor boundaries, and toxic productivity, having to have every single hour count on your calendar or every single minute of the day being productive, and really having that being called out as that hustle culture and issues that are really contributing to burnout. So the World Health Organization then got on board in 2019, and it actually recognized it in the ICD-11. It officially recognized burnout as an occupational phenomenon, but not a medical or mental condition. So it was then taking the diagnosis off of just this person being, oh, this person is burned out, but really talking about it being an occupational issue. And it legitimized the concept in global health discourse, talking about this worldwide now. It became more of an accepted household name across the globe, and emphasized it as a workplace-related syndrome, but again, without application to other areas of our life. And that was in 2019, really focusing on the workplace. So now we have the 2020s. Post-pandemic shift was a very big one. We all know the challenges that we experienced during the pandemic and how that really contributed to a great deal of burnout. COVID-19 caused massive surges in burnout across healthcare, education, remote working professionals. More discussions on collective burnout, parental burnout, and pandemic fatigue. So there is this recognition that it is in other areas, now even saying parental burnout in areas like our personal life. Increasing focus on systemic solutions. Like I said before, it's not go take one day off or here's your discount on your gym membership to deal with on your own. It's more changing, just like we're doing. How are we going to address the workplace culture? There's a call for 4-day work weeks. Mental health days are much more accepted. Boundary setting at work and psychological safety in organizations. Such a big deal, psychological safety, something that we talk about, we train on, and this is a newer concept contributing to burnout. When we have support and psychological safety in our workforce, then we tend to have much less burnout. So what is burnout? How do we define it now? So drawing from the concepts in the 1970s and 80s, organizations such as the American Psychological Association, the Mayo Clinic, and many others now define burnout as a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion, so whole person, caused by prolonged or chronic stress, typically related to work or caregiving roles. It often occurs when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet constant demands. So the APA, American Psychological Association, includes those 3 core dimensions that were first introduced in the 80s: exhaustion, depletion of emotional and physical energy. I know I have people say, I just can't seem to get out of bed. I'm just so exhausted. Cynicism or negative attitudes, a sense of detachment or negativity towards one's job, often with the idea of why bother saying anything? Nothing's really going to change anyway. There's really no point in this. Those are often signs that someone's just really having experiences with burnout. And then inefficiency, reduced professional efficiency or feelings of being ineffective. Like I said, sometimes there's that why bother? Nothing's really going to change. I can't necessarily do anything, so I don't feel like I'm making a meaningful difference, is an indication that often people are feeling burned out. So what contributes to burnout? Research has shown that there are factors that are either protective or significant contributors to burnout. Control over your work, that's a big one. Voice in decisions. So these are all things that research has said can either help or hurt when it comes to burnout. If you have these things, you're much less likely to have burnout in the work setting. Meaningful work, that's a really big one too. Decompression and separation from work. We no longer talk about work-life balance, but we talk about work-life harmony. And that's a big one. We're going to show you a model that discusses that. But instead of thinking of it as a balance, how everything has to be equal, how are we going to ebb and flow with that work-life harmony? But being able to detach from work, to say, hey, work is there. I may be thinking of it, or I may be having something on my mind or something to do, but how can I fully engage in my home life? How can I give to my family, my friends, my pets, whatever's at home, or even just your relaxation and mental health, so I can separate from that work and I can fully engage in my home life? And the opposite is also true. How can I leave home at home and fully engage in work? That's where that harmony comes in. But being able to decompress and enjoy whatever it is at home or time away from work is a really big deal. Clear job expectations and support. And just what we talked about, that support oftentimes means psychological safety. So recent research on global burnout also emphasizes workload. They've done a lot on the healthcare professions in particular globally, and talking about a lot of the challenges recently about increased workload, less time with patients, so less meaningful interactions, more paperwork, more patients, and just this demand for every hour being productive, with that workload contributing to some of that burnout. So what does it look like? It can look different for everyone. It generally manifests through a combination of, just like those factors, all those multiple factors, emotional, physical, mental, and behavioral signs. So it often builds gradually and can go unnoticed until it seriously impacts your well-being, performance, or relationships. I think sometimes in helping professions, we often think, I'm fine, I'm okay, people need me, I'm going to continue to do this, without realizing the impact on ourselves until we often are at a state of significant burnout and may be experiencing signs or symptoms in these areas where it's really tough to address without more significant intervention and not just a day off or a spa day or whatever it might be. So emotional signs: constant irritability, frustration, or anger, feeling like everything's bothering you. Some people feel like, gosh, everything just annoys me lately. Feeling emotionally drained, numb, or detached. People sometimes say, I just have the blahs and I just can't really snap out of it. Loss of motivation or interest in work or activities. Like we talked about, cynicism or negative attitudes towards your job. Colleagues, sometimes feeling negative towards your colleagues, or life in general. It doesn't matter anyway. Feeling like you're failing or not making a difference. So cognitive signs: difficulty concentrating or making decisions, feeling mentally foggy or forgetful, persistent self-doubt or feeling incompetent, lack of creativity or inspiration, and just widespread cognitive difficulty. We talk about these frontal lobes. They're the first to go. They're the first to go when you are stressed, and most often when you have sleep deprivation. And those frontal lobes help us with problem solving, with impulse control. That's why probably late at night we tend to purchase more things through Amazon, or maybe eat more chocolate before bed, or whatever it might be, because we've fatigued those frontal lobes. We've worked hard to use them, and they're not as effective later on. When we have burnout, then those fatigue much quicker, and we have difficulties with impulse control, with managing our emotions much, much quicker. So physical signs: chronic fatigue, like I mentioned, that's oftentimes the biggest one. Feeling tired even after rest. Headaches, muscle aches, stomach issues, GI problems, changes in sleep, appetite changes, and then getting sick more often, issues with your immune system. Behavioral signs. So this is something that's relatively new that's being recognized: withdrawing from responsibilities or social life. How often we say, to colleagues who may ask us to lunch or go out, I'm just too tired, I can't see one more person, I just want to go home and go to bed. And that's okay every once in a while. But when we're losing this connectivity to people, then we start worrying that something might be happening. Procrastination or avoidance, missing deadlines, skipping meetings. Oftentimes people have food, alcohol even, to cope with some of these challenging emotions. Reduced performance or productivity, and then neglecting self-care, skipping exercise, poor hygiene, really just no downtime. So there is this checklist. I'm not going to make you do it right now, but this is the checklist we talked about. It has these areas. I want you to see it. It looks like this. I actually just printed it off. I don't know if you can. No, you can't see it. It's all blurred. Anyway, if you look at each of these, I feel emotionally drained at the end of the day. I often wake up tired, or even after a full night's sleep. You can actually rate them, and it's a rating scale on 1 to 5. 1 being not at all, 2 being rarely, 3 is sometimes, 4 is often, and 5 is very often. So if you assign 1 through 5 on these, and there's the second page, do you have a link? I can get a link to see where we can find it when Tristan's talking, but it is I'll get the title for it too. It's the burnout scale. I just went on and looked at this little, here it is. It's the burnout test. I just looked on a thing that says Mind Tools, and you can Google it, but I'll see if I can get a link for you. And we see these: reduced effectiveness and stress-related behaviors. And after you add them all up, you can look at your results. This checklist here, you just add 1 to each of them. But when we look at the scoring here for the burnout self-test, then there's other additional scores. And if you use the scale 1 to 5, and there's some scoring here that's 15 to 18, no signs of burnout, and it goes up to 75, you're at very severe risk for burnout. So yeah, it's the Maslow Burnout Inventory. So it's a good thing to look at, check yourself, see how you're doing. You might be surprised. You don't have to share it with anyone if you don't want, but it's something to just be aware of. Am I experiencing burnout? Is this something I need to look at? And can I add those things like making sure I have support at work, psychological safety, some say in what I'm doing, making sure what I'm doing is meaningful, having a voice in what I'm doing. Those are all things that can be helpful. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Webster.
Hello, everyone. So we wanted to talk in the same vein about a concept that a lot of people don't actually know about, that is often confused for burnout, so that we have the opportunity to kind of differentiate a little bit. And that concept is moral injury. So moral injury is definitely getting more attention recently, but it seems to be just sort of um, entering the spheres of common discussion. So we wanted to take a moment with that. It is not necessarily a new concept, though. Here's a quote actually from Euripides from 416 BC that really is describing the sense that comes with moral injury. What can I do? Where can I hide from all this and not be found? What wings would take me high enough? How deep a hole would I have to dig? My shame for the evil I have done consumes me. I am soaked in blood guilt, polluted, contagious. I am a pollutant, an offense to gods above. So that is definitely a very powerful sentiment that is often looked at from the context of guilt and shame. But a lot of the issues that we have to deal with on a daily basis aligns us with feelings of having done wrong, similar to, but maybe not as extreme as this. So I want to get into kind of like where the start of that feeling can be. So the first to kind of start defining this construct was Dr. Jonathan Shea, and the initial defining was looked at within military spheres. So really looking at veterans and their sense of having transgressed against other individuals based on situations that they were in, particularly in combat roles or orders that had been given to them. And that initial quote from Euripides was actually something that was identified by Jonathan Shea as constituting a sense of moral injury. So when he was initially looking at it, what he found was particularly for individuals who had gotten order to do something that they felt violated their values, they were left with this sentiment that was not quite burnout, but was something of a similar frustration that was impairing their ability to continue service or to reintegrate after service. So he'd come up with this definition. This is actually a later definition as other folks were starting to weigh in and give their additional takes on where moral injury apply. So moral injury is present when there's been a betrayal of quote unquote what's right, either by a person in legitimate authority, my definition, that is Jonathan Shea saying my definition, or by oneself as in I did it, which he was citing other evidence that was saying that it's actually more than just a person in legitimate authority. It can be you yourself doing it potentially. In a high stakes situation, which we'll get into what that means a little bit more momentarily. So more recent research defines it as a trauma response to witnessing or participating in workplace behaviors that contradict one's moral beliefs in high-stakes situations with the potential of physical, psychological, social, or economic harm to others. So that's a little bit of the kind of what the high-stakes element means. Essentially, it means that as a consequence of whatever the action was, it can potentially harm other individuals. So as this research has been developed, we've been noticing that this applies to a lot more spheres than just within the military. And now it's been looked at within teachers, within physicians and nurses, and the medical system at large. And we're finding basically that within many different spheres, what folks think of as burnout, oftentimes upwards of 25% of the time, may actually be moral injury instead. Important to note that what helps with burnout isn't so helpful for moral injury. So it's important to be able to differentiate the two. So moral injury begins as moral distress. So the fundamental difference with moral distress is, the Euripides quote was definitely a very powerful sentiment of really having a sense of really having done wrong and really feeling kind of like they've fallen apart over it. Moral distress is not necessarily as high stakes a situation or less intense feeling of guilt or betrayal or less difficulty holding the sense that something problematic has happened. So what that means all in all, the simplest definition I think of it is a sense of transgression. And we've crossed the line in terms of a value, what it is that you think is right or wrong, right? And it can either be by another individual or individuals, it can be by the person themselves, or it can be an associated entity. So the end result of it is that it causes harm to somebody else. So that means essentially it can be something like, let's say you were told to do something and you feel like that thing that you had to do harmed the person that you were interacting with, that you were supposed to be helping there. Or a larger entity, like let's say your clinic, or let's say that you feel like LA Health Services at large has done something that has resulted in hurting some folks that they were supposed to have served, then that can also lead to a sense of moral injury or moral distress. This is the full model, the scientific sort of construct behind it. We have what are called potentially morally injurious events. So these are some examples of that: administrative burden, institutional betrayal, ineffective hierarchy, poor communication, lack of support, etc. So what happens with those is those are seen through the lens of the individual. Those are the individual enhancers. So depending on how a person kind of views the world around them, it changes how they feel about those potentially morally injurious events, and leads to what's called cognitive dissonance, a sense that there's a variance between what you're seeing in the world and how you feel it really should be. So let's take administrative burden, for instance. If it feels like because you're overloaded with administrative burden, you're not able to do the kinds of things that would actually allow you to take care of somebody. Let's say, for instance, you're denied the opportunity to actually intervene on something, then that can end up being a morally injurious event. And so that cues moral distress, which, depending on what happens thereafter, if you're not able to heal from it, it may either lead downwards to burnout, job abandonment, PTSD. It may stay in the sphere of moral distress, or it may progress to moral injury. So what does it look like? So the symptoms of it would be persistent shame, guilt, anger, self-punishment or self-sabotage, social withdrawal, loss of meaning or purpose, a sense that work, relationships, or life are irredeemably tainted, spiritual crisis, suicidal thoughts or behaviors, right? So the tricky thing is that a lot of those symptoms are the symptoms of burnout, right? And so that is where it gets really tricky, trying to determine which is which. And the reason why oftentimes there's a sense that you may be burnt out, and you have to actually go back and look at what is the thing that's actually causing it, to differentiate the two. Examples of, so these are essentially potentially morally injurious events for healthcare workers at large. So that can include inability to intervene for any reason, um, needing to triage or other time resource limitations. Let's say you have to take care of somebody right away, and that leads to somebody else being pushed back. And eventually, let's say they end up dropping out, or you're not able to reach them in time before something serious happens. Or learning about a coworker or other institutional error, or policy or cultural or regulatory based restrictions to the practice. Let's say that there's something that you want to do in order to intervene, but you can't because you're just not allowed to. And a lot of the research has really identified the experience of COVID as having been an incredibly morally injurious situation. And the implication of it spreads to other situations where you feel like things are out of control and your hands are tied because either you don't know what to do in that situation. So you're ending up trying to do the best that you can within that situation and winds up having accidents potentially. Um, or the resources end up drying up and it makes it very difficult to intervene in the way that you need to, or globally things are feeling unjust. So the cultural pretext for both burnout and moral injury, why I want to get into that part, as I mentioned a moment ago, the specific lensing of the individual can change the way that certain situations end up leading to either burnout or moral injury, or in some cases both. So I want to touch base first on what culture actually is. So my favorite definition of culture is that it's the set of tools that a group uses in order to solve everyday problems. So for example, you need to eat, right? Where are you going to get your food? What kind of food are you going to actually get? Are you going to cook that food? How do you eat that food? All of those sorts of things that are everyday issues end up building into culture at large, and they teach lessons about how to address things that we encounter on a regular basis. And what that actually builds out to largely is lessons about what duty is, purpose is, value is, what we're supposed to be doing on a daily basis. And so that has implications for what we feel like is okay and not so okay in given situations. And so that means more or less tolerance for certain things that may be potentially morally injurious, right? So those potentially morally injurious situations may be potentiated depending on how you interpret the situation. Likewise, your threshold for how you feel you can tolerate certain things can raise or lower your susceptibility to burnout. And I will pass it back to Dr. McSwan.
Okay, so what does culture mean for burnout? So keeping in mind that definition that Dr. Webster just talked about, we often have challenges with American culture of work hard and accomplish anything. And that's that hustle culture we talked about. I think oftentimes there's the message of if you only just work harder, then you won't feel burned out or you won't be having struggles in any way. And that work is often our identity. People always say when you meet them, you know, how are you? What do you do? What do you do for work? Because that's just such a part of our identity. I know there's other cultures where that's considered like offensive if you ask that, or maybe even they don't even ask that at all because it's not necessarily considered what you do isn't necessarily who you are, where it is in our culture. Overemphasis on individualism and self-reliance, like again, just go and do your work and come back when it's done. And then oftentimes we have a lack of structural support for rest and the idea that rest is earned. I talk to people sometimes that say, yeah, they only reward themselves, maybe reading a book or watching TV when all the work is done, and not really incorporating rest into that work. And I feel like that's oftentimes what we do also when we work through lunch. We're not taking a minute to rest or even process when something affects us at work, because we have to get that work done first. 24/7 availability, we talked about that tech culture, blurring of boundaries oftentimes leads to burnout, and stigma around mental health and rest too. Just like we talked about that, there's a stigma around it. We're battling that. It's getting better, but it's something that in our culture is something that we're overcoming. commodification of time. I don't know about you, but I'm always commodifying. How many steps do I take? What is my heart rate? I'm looking at stats all the time. And people are saying that sometimes, if you go for a run or a jog, just to pay attention to the birds and the things around you, and not necessarily how many steps or miles. But we often are doing that. We are measuring. And then oftentimes, if we don't accomplish the goal or we feel we fall short on that, even if it's for rest or exercise or a walk, then oftentimes, we have extra stress about that. There is that every hour or every minute even needs to be productive. And then in our culture, we have often a lack of communal support systems like neighborhoods, people getting together, and intergenerational support, where we don't necessarily have, we do sometimes, but not always, several generations living under a roof and supporting, especially with meals or childcare, and thinking about oftentimes people who are experiencing burnout are struggling to really balance all of that. A very demanding work schedule, and then dinner and kids or aging adults and taxes and all the stuff we have to do. Oftentimes we're doing it by ourselves with that demand that, things need to look good. There's all these pictures of everyone doing things looking good, and having to do all of this by ourselves is really a big contributor for burnout. I'll hand it over to Dr. Webster.
And then for culture and moral injury. So there are very significant correlates in a broad range of spheres. I think that I will not actually go through the majority of these because I want to get to discussing the orphan crushing machine. So one of the major issues that I feel like we have, and several other folks, I think, raised initially by ethicists, is that we have an issue whereby oftentimes we discuss the heroics of individuals who save people from situations, but we don't necessarily talk about the situations themselves and why they exist. So the idea of the orphan crushing machine, it's a social commentary that says that if somebody were to rescue an orphan from the orphan crushing machine, then what would happen is that the headlines would read, "Local hero rescued orphan from the orphan crushing machine." It's unlikely that anybody would actually ask the reason why the orphan crushing machine actually exists. And we see this fairly regularly throughout our society at large. Oftentimes there's the justification of it exists because, there's the industry of the orphan crushing machine producers, and the orphan crushing machine producers support our economy, and the orphan crushing machine itself doesn't do anything wrong. It's the orphans that go into the crushing machine, those sorts of things. And so those social parallels are issues that we're seeing fairly regularly, right? And what it points out is that depending again on cultural lensing, the justification for certain things that may in other takes be abhorrent may actually be tolerated or justified, right? This is a lot of what we have going on right now, a lot of chaos, a lot of overwhelm, a lot of heaviness, a lot of distraction, a lot of excess and lack, right? And so I feel like for us in particular here at LA Health Services and the roles that we fill, we're very much in tune with the broad range here. But it is cultural perspective that allows individuals to justify different aspects of this graphic here, right? In some cases, folks feel like it's justified because, let's say, whatever it is that we're looking at is earned, right? So an individual who may be experiencing homelessness, likewise an individual who's experiencing immense wealth, well, they earned that, right? The current militarization of police and the introduction of ICE into our daily repertoire, right? well, that is justified by our need for freedom and our rules and regulations, right? So those sorts of things are all culturally lensed things where for certain individuals, it leads to a sense of moral injury because we're associated, right, at large with this entity that is the nation at large. And from brand to small scale, we're dealing with all of these things at this moment that we have to, based on our own perspectives, see whether or not we can actually resolve as being something that violates our values or not. Meanwhile, we're also coming into broadly the healthcare setting where, regardless of what our role is, we're expected to sort of join this unrealistic presentation of what healthcare at large is, with all of our smiling patients that are not hitting you or throwing anything at you, and insurance forms that are going, I mean, in this case, but billing that is going through without complications, and teams that don't have factions and everybody gets along, and everything, we have the answer for everything and it's all miraculous, right? And so that sort of disparity between what we're actually having to deal with on a daily basis and how we're told things are supposed to be introduces both those potentially morally injurious events and also the cognitive dissonance that can potentiate those events into actual moral distress and moral injury, or into burnout. So how do burnout and moral injury impact one another? So they are correlated, but they are distinct. Oftentimes they actually co-occur because, again, many of the things that cause burnout can also be morally injurious. So it depends a lot, again, on going back to what the originating situation is, whether or not there's a sense of a value violation there that has occurred. Stress as a resource demand is essentially speaking about what stress is. So if you think of stress as being, you have a certain amount of resource to do things and you have a certain amount of demand that you have to rise to, either, you have to get a certain amount of stuff done or you have to take care of yourself in a certain way, right? The amount of resource that you have to do that, if you feel like it's lacking, you're going to feel more and more stress, right? And so if you're already feeling like you're dealing with morally injurious situations, then chances are you're going to feel more burnt out because you have less of that resource to deal with whatever the situations are that you're regularly charged with. And so those resource demands end up being fatiguing, and morally injurious spaces, if you're in a space that you feel like violates your values regularly, it's going to constantly put you in a state of stress, which will eventually lead to burnout.
So how do we address burnout? Some tips here, some things we're moving towards, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we're doing that as a department. But overall, acknowledge and name it. Say I'm burnt out, I'm struggling. Normalize conversations around it. Also, understanding and knowing that the workplace has a responsibility to help with that. It's not, again, viewed as a shortcoming on your end individually. So having those conversations, discussing it, normalizing it, accepting it, that's one of the big things. Evaluate workload and expectations. I know this is a really hard one. We have freezes, we have, short-staffed situations where we can't always say, we have patients who need us to say, well, I'm at my limit today. And so that's something that's a real challenge. But how can we prioritize? I know oftentimes we add, and to think about, okay, if I'm adding this, is there any way I can maybe, do something else later, or prioritize the things that we feel are most meaningful, or having the biggest need. But instead of just adding, can we look at ways to prioritize? Create a culture of psychological safety. We're doing a lot of training on this. We're hoping to do more training on this with supervisors, managers, employees to make sure that we create a psychologically safe environment, to bring up concerns, to talk about things and have a voice, and do so while feeling safe to do it and having the response be a psychologically safe one, and making sure that everyone's voice is heard. support autonomy and flexibility when possible. I know there's a lot of demands. We have schedules, we have patients to see, but within that, how can we support autonomy and flexibility? Because that helps us avoid burnout. Invest in training, invest in our people. I know that we can't often get promotions right now. Maybe there's freezes, but what can we do to help with skill sets to individual growth so that we can be ready when something opens and we're allowed to move in different areas, but still growing ourselves as people, growing our skills. Those are things that are really helpful. Redefining success and recognition, value team support and knowledge sharing. So how are we going to be able to build our communities within our workspace to help one another and support one another? So we give recognition, that's really important, but also making sure that we give recognition for things like, again, valuing team support and working together, helping one another, mentoring, and providing recognition for those. Build rest into the system. This is hard too. I struggle with this myself. I used to talk about needing a crumb tray when I worked at Rancho over my keyboard, because all I ever did was eat lunch over my keyboard. And I would often just put it upside down and shake all the crumbs out. And really making sure that we take time for this, because it's really important to rest, and we're much more productive at that point. Strengthening purpose and belonging, and then measuring and tracking our metrics, absenteeism, turnover, things that can be helpful so that we can see the impact on programs and the culture that we are creating or not, and if we need to move and put our efforts in another area.
So I want to make sure that we have some time for Q&A. So you all will get these slides. I highly encourage going through the point by point for how we address moral injury. But I want to highlight that the primary intervention for moral injury is correcting the system at large. So really trying to understand how morally injurious events are relevant to your workspace, and really making sure that there's good communication between the line staff and those that can make determinations and changes, in order to make sure that line staff is supported in making decisions to act in ways that are appropriate, and making sure that there isn't imposition by leadership that causes those morally injurious events. We can get the next slide, please. There is an amount of intervention that individuals can do to try to alleviate moral injury. And so a lot of that is acknowledging and disclosing the moral injury, really talking about it within safe space, dealing with managing to forgive oneself and giving self-compassion, finding meaning in those experiences, advocating for those necessary institutional changes, bolstering self-awareness and self-regulation, prevention through ethical competence. So that means like knowing and being able to recognize when you're in a situation that can be harmful potentially, and being able to not end up getting into that situation. And then cultivating and maintaining connections with others can help bolster and avoid those potentially morally injurious events developing into moral distress.
This is the workforce well-being model we work from. I will encourage you to look it up. It is the previous Surgeon General's model. There is a tremendous amount of research behind it. If you can just look there, the Office of the U.S. Surgeon General Workforce Well-Being Model. You'll see the model, all the components to it, and the research as to why they chose these components. It's very helpful to look at. This is the model we work from. We're not going to go into detail here. We want to make sure we have time for questions for you. But this is the model that we are working from, and how we're addressing burnout, moral injury, and we're hoping to contribute to a culture of workplace well-being.
So that is available in detail. Both we'll get these slides to you, but also it's on our SharePoint. But we did want to recommend just a basic framework for you to think of as you're just kind of approaching your daily work, because it's a lot easier than memorizing the Surgeon General's workforce wellness framework that I still don't have memorized after eight months. So identifying the stressors, identifying your resources, identifying your values, identifying the barriers to doing things in a way that isn't harmful or overwhelming, and making sure that you're doing shared decision making, which means that you're bringing in all of the stakeholders in a given situation so that you can really discuss what positive and effective changes may be. And then making sure that everybody from leadership all the way to line staff is approaching this with openness and preparation to reevaluate, which means making sure that those feedback loops are in place. And with that, we have a couple of moments. I think we're going to go ahead and skip the activity so that we can give a little bit of time to our Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, sorry everybody. We didn't want to interrupt the presentations or cut it short more than we absolutely had to, because the presentation this is such good information. I think all of us can relate to it to one degree or another. And I just, thank you to everyone, our panelists and our audience today. Just really quick, there were a couple of pre-submitted questions. But the one that I think is most pertinent, if I'm going to make an executive decision across the couple questions that we received, someone would like to know how one removes guilt from their thought process. And I think this is a pretty deep question. And to me, at least, like, it means the guilt that comes with feeling like you're letting others down, letting your patients down, letting your coworkers that rely on you to be there, letting them down. Is there any way to truly rid oneself of guilt, or is it just something that we have to ride out, I guess, like grief, or is there a better way to deal with it? Did either of you want to try that one?
I'll go for this one. This is such an important one. It's universal. Sometimes when we talk about barriers, what are your barriers to well-being? Someone in my last presentation said, feeling like I deserve it. Right? So having that guilt to say, do I deserve it? I think it is so important to have that culture change to say you are deserving of well-being. You are deserving of rest. It is a battle. I think that most of us go into healthcare because we're giving individuals, right? We want to make that difference. And we're always going to see someone in front of us who needs us. Everyone needs us. Home needs us. Work needs us. Everyone needs us. And we have a lot to give. So recognizing, I think it's just so vital to know that this really is a marathon, right? Life is a marathon. And if we don't give to ourselves, if we don't rest, then we will have situations where we are burned out, where we won't be able to continue. And it won't mean that we won't care or that we won't want to help people. It will be that we physically are not able to. Sometimes our bodies makes that decision for us to say, I can't get out of bed. I'm just not able to give anymore. And it's just not a decision we make. Sometimes it's made for us. So recognizing, understanding the first step is this education to say, hey, you absolutely have to do this or you will not be able to continue. Understanding that the culture needs to change too. We're working on that. I think that oftentimes for me, when I would eat lunch at my desk, I'd have colleagues come pull me out. Hey, come on, please come with us. And then saying, you know what, you're right. That was really helpful. That was really regenerative. I was able to connect with these people and recognizing I needed to do it more often. So get your buddies, get people, get support, and really recognize that that just has to happen. I think sometimes talking to someone about it and having someone say, hey, you're not alone. I feel that way too, but let's go for a walk. Let's do these things, or we won't be able to help in the future. It's such a universal thing. You are deserving of workforce well-being. I think that's just something we should put on our walls to say you really, truly deserve it, or you won't be able to continue truly.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really important. And the concept of, your body is going to make a decision for you eventually anyway. So why leave it up to your body? Leave it up to you, the conscious decision maker with the two front, make sure that decisions aren't going to be made for you. Sorry, it looks like my peripherals are having a field day here. Okay, we only have 3 minutes left. Tristan, I wanted to turn it to you really quick to see if you had anything to add to that as well.
Well, I feel like the draw of my therapist side is to always say therapy's great. So I want to put a plug in for therapy. There's always that. But that's not necessary in all cases. And I do think that definitely leaning on your support systems is a huge factor, as Dr. Mixwan mentioned. And I think a part of how that helps is really looking at support systems can be very validating and can remind you that, we all make mistakes and we're human and we can be okay after that point in time. We have something that we call post-traumatic growth, which, even at small levels of trauma, we can see, which is making meaning out of difficult events. And so from that, you can kind of launch into really thriving and being able to disseminate meaningful messages from whatever it is that actually happens. So for me, I find personally, when I'm feeling super guilty about something, trying to transform that into something that's actually practical and useful, I feel like creates that kind of like cosmic balance of the debt that I owe or whatever that is, you know? And that helps out a lot, in addition to really kind of looking to friends to say, hey, you know, was that really okay? And oftentimes I'll hear, it's all right, you're good, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you both so much. Huge thank you to Charmaine, Tristan, Kelly. You know, your time and expertise are greatly appreciated. And so really quick, next month, the ACES-LA team will be taking a break from our monthly lunch and learn in order to make way for our annual CBO convening, which will take place on Wednesday, October 22nd. So please mark your calendars for that day and join us as we welcome our community partners in the network of care for an annual roundtable and interactive session with our DHS staff. So one more time, our CBO convening will take place Wednesday, October 22nd, and we look forward to seeing everyone there. Enjoy the rest of your week, enjoy the rest of your month, and stay cool, DHS. We will see you again soon. Thank you.